Hello, I'm James Rivera. I have a number of books possibly coming out, maybe up to 4 over the next year to 18 months. So between now and when I get caught up in all of that, I thought I'd post a series of short videos about the books I already have. Generally, I plan to post 2 videos about every book. One's a bit longer, maybe up to a half hour, and one will be about 5 or 10 minutes, posted to TikTok and then posted around my other social media accounts. My second book is Reading as Democracy in Crisis, Interpretation Theory History. It was published by Lexington in 2019. This was a crazy thing to get out. And by the way, I need to say, the cover design and image is by my daughter, Becca. I'm very proud of her. Thank you. Very cool. I'll show you again. The statued woman's head is on fire with a sparkler. And I'm grateful that she worked with me on that cover image. And she worked with me on the cover image for the David Bowie and Romanticism book, and I'll talk about that one sometime later. This book is a direct follow-up from my dissertation and then the book that followed it, which was Blake and Kierkegaard, Creation and Anxiety. That one was published by Continuum in 2010. And immediately after the publication of that book, I started working on this book. This book was originally published by Lexington, which was a subsidiary of Rowman and Littlefield, in 2019. It took 9 years to get this book out. I started working on it in 2010, I would say maybe 2011 at the latest. And I finally located a publisher and got the thing published in 2019. That's just how some of these anthologies go. There is one other on the market at the time by Peter Herman. And what his book and mine does is try to place literary theory, different literary theories, different ways of reading literature in historical context, in their historical context. The attempt is to historicize theory. Peter Herman did it first. He was mostly focused on post-structuralism. And I talked to him, I asked him how it went, and he said, well, and he's very generous, he's a great guy. He said, well, it was successful in that we got a bunch of good chapters and got the book published, but that was like the end of it. Nobody reviewed it. I don't think anyone's reviewed my book either. And that's too bad because I think that work is important. So Peter Herman's book is, I think it's called Deconstructing Theory. I should have looked it up before I started this video. But look up Peter Herman. Look up his books, and you'll find it right away. And if you're interested in this topic, his book is great. And mine is pretty good too. The difference between his and mine is that his is focused on post-structuralism, and mine is from Plato to the present, including a discussion of post-structuralism, but it's certainly not limited to that. So I would say he's narrower in focus, and mine is more broad-based. What happened when I was writing my dissertation and then revising that into Blake and Kierkegaard was that I discussed this in the Blake and Kierkegaard video too. I felt like we needed some kind of justification for applying any kind of a theory to a specific literary work, because theories are historically contingent things. They're not raw truths that descend from the heavens. So I wanted to create a shared historical basis for applying Kierkegaard to my reading of William Blake. I wanted to historicize my theoretical approach on the same basis as I was historicizing my reading of the literature, William Blake. And that worked very well with Blake and Kierkegaard, actually. So I discussed that in more detail in the video for Blake and Kierkegaard, Creation and Anxiety. So this one I wanted to focus on what it means to do that to begin with. I wanted to historicize theory. For a long time, the title of my book in my mind was Interpretation Theory History. But as I finished writing up my introduction and chapter, I realized the historical context that give birth to these different ways of reading literature or reading in general were in part motivated by historical periods in which democracy was in crisis. And each chapter in its own way kind of demonstrates that. One of the main insights of this book is that our historical milieu contributes to the way we read and think about literature and just read in general, and the way we theorize reading, the act of reading as well, and interpretation. And the book is an attempt to explore how that's happened at a few different periods in history from Plato to the present. It's an anthology, okay, so I contribute chapter 1, which is Democracy as Context for Theory. Now, on the one hand, we have Plato. On the other hand, we have Derrida. And they seem very far apart, but I kind of bring them together. They're readers of Socrates. They're both readers of Socrates. And they're both struggling with crises in democracy. Plato lived through the 30 Tyrants, overthrow of Athenian democracy, and Derrida was Jewish and suffered under Nazi rule in Algeria. And he began studying Husserl in Germany, in part to understand the phenomenology of fascism. And to write this, I read everything that Derrida wrote that I could, that was translated into English. And I've been assured that Derrida is much easier to read in French than he is in English, and now I want to learn French. From 1953 to about 1972, that's what I read. And I realized most of what was being said about Derrida as I learned about him in literary theory in that field wasn't really right. He wasn't a literary critic. He wasn't a theorist. He thought of himself as a phenomenologist. And some of the things he said can be brought to bear upon our reading practices, but that wasn't what his focus was. And he begins with a study of Husserl and everything and Husserl's phenomenology, and everything that he says after that, especially through the 60s and into the 70s, comes from that foundational study. The priority of writing over speech, the inversion of the privileging of speech over writing, that's historically the case in the West, comes from his study of phenomenology. And they're both struggling with these crises in democracy, and they're both readers of Socrates, and I bring them together in that chapter. Chapter 2, Aglia Venters, reads Hegel as in the middle of a crisis of faith brought on by the French Revolution. Eric Hood reads Karl Marx as the end of the Enlightenment. Steve Wexler reads Ludwig Wittgenstein in his early 20th century context, where you have World War I and the milieu that created the rise of fascism in the early 20th century, leading into full-blown fascism in World War II. Cassandra Falk writes about Robert Penn Warren, poetry, racism, and the burden of history. So the crisis of democracy is the civil rights era, and the West grappling with its own racism, especially the United States. Meredith Sinclair contributes Louise Rosenblatt, The Reader, Democracy and the Ethics of Reading. Philip Goldstein contributes a chapter on aesthetic theory from Adorno to cultural history, which is great because I'm rereading Adorno's aesthetic theory for the second time, so I want to go back to Goldstein's chapter and see what he says about it. Darcy Rives East, Judith Butler, A Livable Life, Chapter 8, and Roger Whitson concludes the collection with Networking the Great Outdoors, Object-Oriented Ontology, and the Digital Humanities, which brings in the use of Twitter in the Arab Spring, which was itself another crisis, maybe not of democracy, but for democracy. So it's a great collection, and each chapter is worthy of attention in its own way. One new insight that comes about for me in these books and in this book, and I found that every time I write a book, I come up with one new idea for me. So, with Blake and Kierkegaard, the new idea was historicizing the theoretical approach to provide a justification for its use in reading literature from a certain period. And for this, the next step in that was the idea that you don't have to trace a direct influence to establish the validity of a theoretical paradigm. What you can do is establish something that I call a conditioned response model of reading, in that similar historical conditions can produce similar responses from people at different periods of history. And in my reading, I found people who approximate that idea, but don't quite spell it out as completely as I do in the introduction and then in my chapter on Plato and Derrida. So the development of this book took a long time. In some ways, I guess you could say it's the least successful of my books. I think WorldCat has it in about 100 libraries around the world. And pretty much all of them are in more than that already. And my first one's in over 1,500. But I think we need to revisit this, and we need to continue doing work in this area. We need to keep historicizing theory and not just theorize history. We need to realize that our ideas are all historically contingent in some ways, and bring that out, talk about it, make it a focus, instead of driving a wedge between theory and history. We need to bring them together so that we historicize theory while we are theorizing history. And I think that's what I want to say about this book. I encourage you to go to bloomsburynow.com if you want to order it for your library, or go to jamesrovira.com, ROVIRA/bookstore if you'd like to order it directly from me. And you can order all my books directly from me at the bookstore on my website, jamesrovira.com. And I think it'd be a good addition to your library, especially if you have a lit theory classes going on. And make sure you get Peter Herman's book too. It's a valuable contribution to the study of post-structuralism. Thank you.